Guys, we'll go into the lesson in a couple of minutes. Just give everyone a chance to get logged in. For those of you that don't have a channel and so then you can't comment, I will check my email periodically just to see what tally is with you. Can't comment on the channel, but can send me an email and you want to comment, I'll check that too. Hey, welcome back. Hi, Caitlin. We've got 4 on now. Hi, Liza. Oh, thumbs up already. Look at you guys. Pushing that like button. Hey, Caroline. All right, just get it a little bit longer, and then we'll. Oh, 2 likes. What? Hey, Trey, what's up? We got Caroline, we've got Trey, we've got Liza, we've got Caitlin. Someone else just hopped on. Good to see all you guys in the comments. Wish we could be seeing each other in person, but I'm glad we're able to do this so there's at least some level of connection still. All right, let's get into this. Today we're talking about deviance. And deviance has a bad connotation, but it doesn't necessarily have to be bad, which we'll talk about tomorrow. There are some positive roles of deviance. We hear deviance, a lot of times we think of it as someone doing something bad, but it doesn't mean something bad in the sociological sphere. In sociology and in the social sciences, deviance is just something that departs from or deviates from social norms. So the question of deviance is first addressed by asking, what is normal? Or what is a proper way to act in a given situation? And this can be different based on someone's group or someone's cultural group or subculture or whatever it is. So the idea of normal, we're not talking about necessarily a ubiquitous or universal normal, because I don't know that there is such thing, or that there are such things rather, but we're talking about cultural norms. So what are things that don't line up with cultural norms? That's deviance. Because just really simply, I mean, this is one of the easiest contextual ones, because they deviate from social norms. So an example of this would be crime. Crime is an example of deviance because there are social norms in place that govern what is acceptable behavior. And for example, stealing is not acceptable behavior. It violates or breaks or deviates from social norms. And so if you steal, or when someone steals, they are being deviant. Not in the necessarily just ethical sense, but in the social norm sense. It's deviance. And a lot of times, social norms dictate punishment. If you deviate too far outside of a social norm, there can be punishment or punitive measures taken to ensure that everyone stays in line with the social norms. One thing that your book addresses is this idea of collective conscience. And I want to just clarify, because there's a theory out there called collective consciousness. And this is different. It's not the same thing. The idea of collective consciousness is that our minds are somehow interconnected, in that once enough people know something or learn something, then everybody knows it or everybody learns it. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about collective conscience. And collective conscience is shared norms, beliefs, and values of a community. And if you heard that, that sounds a whole lot like the definition of culture. So really, collective conscience is just more the values side of culture. And we use collective conscience to make judgment calls or decisions, or to discern what deviates from our norms. But in order for there to be deviance, we have to actually have norms. Now, some norms vary among cultural groups or social groups. For example, style, right? Like, style is something that can be different based on one's generation or age group. It can be different based on one's geographic region, one's ethnicity. So someone that's Kenyan might dress differently than someone who's Ugandan, and might dress differently than someone who's Estonian. So style can be different, but in those subgroups, there are norms. And what is not part of the norm is considered to deviate or deviant from the norms. Another example is naps. I know some of you guys might like naps. I know some people that like naps. I actually know someone that on the weekends, and this is not me, they take 3 naps a day on the weekends. They like naps so much. But some cultures have a nap that everyone's supposed to take, or most people take, the siesta, right? So in Mexico and in some Central and South American regions, there's a post lunch or an afternoon nap, and that's a cultural norm. And if you don't take that nap, you are deviating from the cultural norm. And there are just countless examples of cultural norms that can be deviated from. But what I want you to get is if you're not lining up with the cultural norm or the expectation or the rules, then that's considered to be deviance. But that doesn't mean it's necessarily a bad thing. There are some good things that can come from deviance at some times. All right, so I'm going to pause real quick for questions and see up to this point if anyone has questions about deviance. Okay, so now let's talk about labeling. Now, your book makes the case that we label deviance or we label deviant actions or activities. Now, I disagree with that because I think, or rather, I think that's just myopic or short sighted in the book. I think we label all behaviors, but there just tends to be a negative connotation with the labels of some deviant activities or some deviant actions. But all activities or all actions, I think we label. And like, for example, encouraging, that's labeling an activity, but that doesn't have a negative connotation to the label. When you uplift someone or support someone, right, or spur someone on, you're encouraging them, but that doesn't mean it's negative. So we label activities, but it's just that I think your book's trying to say that deviant behaviors often have a negative connotation associated with the labels that we give them. Also, stigma. All right, so both labeling and stigma can be forms of social controls to try to get people not to deviate too far from the norms. Uh, Now, I'm not saying this is right, but we could even assign a label to people who deviate too far. People might be called weird or strange, right, if they do something outside of the norm. I'm not saying we should do that. I'm just saying that that could even be where we label people as a cultural phenomenon. I'm not supporting that. I'm just saying that that does occur also, and that's a form of a social control. Now back to stigma. So a stigma is a form of enforcing norms, and it's when there is shame attached to deviance. And an example of a stigma that comes to mind for me when I look at our culture back in the day, one that existed but does not exist today, would be shame attached to being an unwed mother in any era pre 1990. Right? Even in the 90s, there was still some stigma attached to it. It's really the late 90s and early 2000s when we start to see the stigma dropping away. But there was an element of shame that the culture imposed on someone for being an unwed mother in any time really previous to the late 1990s. And that's a form of social control. Now, we can debate whether or not there should be stigmas attached to certain things. I think clearly there should be stigmas attached to some things. Nazism, there needs to be a stigma against Nazism, right? Because Nazism is an evil ideology, and we shouldn't be accepting of Nazism. So there needs to be a stigma against some things. We can parse out what should have and shouldn't have stigmas associated with it, right? But stigma is a form of social control, and it tries to keep people from associating with that deviant ideology. So the idea is, whether it's intentional or unintentional, the idea of a stigma associated with an action is to keep other people from doing that deviant action or whatever that thing is that deviates from the social norm. So what I want you to get from today is that deviance is anything that departs from cultural or social norms, and that we judge what is a cultural or social norm based on this concept of collective conscience. So it's shared norms, beliefs, and values of a community. And that through labeling with negative connotations or through stigma, we use social controls to try to keep deviance at a minimum or to keep people away from deviance that is deemed to be detrimental or harmful in society. All right, so that's it for today. I'm going to pause real quick for questions, see if anyone has any questions or comments. Okay, so uh, if you haven't already done your homework or checked RenWeb for your homework, or you can check RenWeb. I'm keeping RenWeb up to date, by the way, or check your email. Make sure you check that, get that in. Also, just a reminder, third quarter is closing. Well, third quarter is actually closed-ish. All of this week's grades are going in fourth quarter. And if you owe me anything for third quarter and would like to get it in, please get it into me before the end of the weekend, because third quarter grades, I have to turn those over to the school by 8 a.m. on Monday. So if there's anything you want to get into me, please make sure you do that in as timely a manner as possible, and I'll make sure to get that in for you. If you have any questions or any comments in the meantime, please feel free to email me. You guys are doing a good job. Keep up the good work, and I'll talk to you soon. All right. Bye.